Hello and welcome to Education and Training.
This podcast is designed to support the learning you'll undergo on your CLM course. You may want to have a pen and paper to hand so you can take notes and complete any practice exercises. Change is a vital part of Army business. In fact, a vital part of any business. Businesses like Asda and McDonald's are constantly implementing change in order to stay competitive in their markets. The Army is no different. Change is necessary as the enemy and the operating environment evolve. As the saying goes, evolve or die. It's the structured management of change that will ensure its success. The management of people, resources, timelines, communications, and everything else. I'm sure it's something that everyone in the Army does and that you do. But do we always do it effectively? We'll look at three areas. Firstly, we'll look at stakeholders, those individuals who are affected by the change. Next, we'll look at the change process itself. This step-by-step approach will be based on the 3 steps of change associated with Kurt Lewin. The final area we'll look at will be the principles of change that Timothy Noster suggests that you should consider. To help you easily distinguish between the two, consider change management in the same way you would if you were planning a section attack. In a section attack, you need certain things to happen in a certain order, and this is your process, in this case, Lewin. However, you also need to ensure you comply with certain principles. For example, your section attack requires stealth, security, and surprise. In the same way, change management requires the principles which we will see given to us by Noster. One of the first things you need to do is identify who will be affected by your change, your stakeholders. Once you've done that, you can feed it into your analysis and come up with a plan of how you'll then implement change, bearing in mind the different experiences and responses that each of these stakeholders will have. Forget to consider one party and they may create a big headache for you further down the line. Let's take an example from the civilian environment first. The removal of cigarette advertising, and try to identify all the people that were affected by the change. This then helps to understand why the change manager, in this case the Labour government of 2003, implemented the change in the way that they did. With a pen and paper, please make a list of all the people and groups you think were affected. Pause this video and press play again when you're ready to compare with my answers. So press pause now. Cigarette companies were affected because their profits were going to shrink, so they'd resist the change. Health campaigners would be affected as they'd be getting something that they want, although they might not feel the change was going to go far enough. Sporting organisations such as Formula One teams and snooker tournaments would no longer be able to get sponsorship, so they'd probably resist the change. Companies that produced the advertising for the tobacco companies would be losing work, so they would probably resist the change. The general voter would be affected, as it was part of Labour's 1997 manifesto, so all those that voted for Labour would be pleased that they were carrying out their mandate, and so they'd be for the change. Arguably, the people least affected by it were the smokers themselves. Your list may be more expansive than mine, or you might have a few less, it doesn't really matter. The key is to start thinking a bit more outside the box about who's going to be affected. Have a go at doing a similar exercise, but with Army 2020 Refine. Consider all the stakeholders affected by the re-rolling and rebasing of units, as well as the creation of the strike brigades and specialised infantry battalions. Again, pause the video and write down as many as you can. Press pause now. As you can see, the list is extensive. Now, let's take a look at the change management process. We're going to use Lewin's model of change as the foundations of the step-by-step process and then flesh it out with the sorts of activities involved. Lewin called his 3 steps unfreezing, change, refreezing. As you see, this is a continuous cycle as very few changes are permanent. The unfreezing period is all about laying the foundations for change. Essentially, this is your battle prep. The change is the period where you implement the change, and the refreezing is similar to the exploitation phase of a combat activity, where you're trying to maintain momentum and consolidate your success. Let's take an example of an activity which is a regular occurrence in the army, a change in issued kit. The example we use is the move from DPM to MTP. In the unfreeze stage, the battle prep, the focus needs to be on planning and information dissemination, a bit like conducting your estimate and then giving out warning orders, followed by full sets of orders. In this instance, the G4 chain needs to be informed so they could carry out their anticipatory activity, ensuring that they knew how much stock they needed and they'd trained people to give it out. Other stakeholders, such as soldiers, manufacturers, the chain of command, etc., they needed to be informed of the incoming change. Timelines also needed to be set out so everyone from manufacturer, supplier, and end user knew when they'd be moving from DPM to MTP. In the change section, it's important that the principle of war maintenance of momentum is applied. This means that the G4 chain needed to ensure that the kit was given out at the right time to the right people in the right sizes. If it comes to a stutter, as people can't access the kit, then the change starts to slow down and it loses its impetus. The people being asked to change would also lose confidence in the process. The change needed to be supported by the chain of command. One of these requirements was that the person wearing MTP was given direction on how it was to be worn. In my personal experience, there was a period of at least a year where something as simple as shirts tucked in or shirts out, creases in the trousers or no creases was not commonly understood, and this led to confusion. This was despite a 2015 Army briefing note coming out in the unfreezing process, which explained exactly how it was to be worn. The refreezing period was when MTP and the current dress regs became the norm. This was facilitated by the chain of command leading by example and implementing discipline where dress regs were not complied with. It's since moved into the unfreezing period again as we start to introduce Virtus. So let's have a look at what activities you'll carry out during the management of significant change. In the first place, there needs to be opportunity to identify problems and requirements for change. Now, the military creates lots of opportunities for this. Post-exercise and operational reports, after-action reviews, INVAL, EXVAL, O groups. It could be something as simple as an email from an individual to their chain of command, or just a conversation in the mess bar over a drink. Once you've flagged up an issue, you need to obtain data. This will be data on the problem itself. Your chain of command might want you to provide more evidence for the need to change, which will show that the problem is not just a one-off and actually needs dealing with. You'll then need to identify stakeholders, which we've touched on already. And you'll also need to find out how much of a budget or time or manpower you're being given to implement the change. The methods you'll use to conduct your research will be interviews, emails, and surveys. And you might also use video evidence if the problem you've identified is an activity in the field. The third stage is all about your critical thinking skills. You'll probably have amassed lots of data and you need to pull your deductions out of it. This is very similar to analysing the situation at question 1 of the estimate process, which is why the 3-column format and SWOT are useful tools at this point. Once you know what you need to do, you need to sync your various activities into an action plan. Project managers often use Gantt charts, which describe activities which may happen simultaneously or rely on others to be completed first. Think about building a house. The electrics rely on the building being watertight, and the building isn't going to be watertight before the walls are finished. However, at various stages, you can have concurrent activity. Again, this is exactly like a sync matrix in the estimate process. When you reach the stage of implementation, the key to success is leadership. Applying the Army Leadership Code at this point will make successful change more likely. After all, you need to be leading by example, applying discipline and reward, and encouraging confidence in the team to make any significant change a success. The next stage is follow-up and stabilisation. This might be in the form of working groups and open forums led by the chain of command. It may also mean including outside agencies which can help people who are more heavily affected by and possibly struggling to cope with the change. In order to ensure that the change was worthwhile and the change process has been carried out in an effective manner, assurance of the change is vital. Otherwise, how can you prove that it was necessary? Remembering that the people needing to do the assurance of the implementation of MTP were not the chain of command implementing the change, but people much higher up who decided that it was a worthwhile investment. They needed to justify it to budget holders and ultimately taxpayers. Using the Defence Systems approach to training and Kirkpatrick's level of evaluation will give you data for different assurance needs. DSAT and Kirkpatrick is covered in the training valuation lesson on one officer's CLM, but you can also find lots of information on Kirkpatrick through a simple Google search. It's important to note that it's quite easy to measure the change at the level of results and return on investment in a business, because you look at changes to profit after the change. However, in the military, how do you measure the effects of the changes to TTPs or kits? Do you look at fewer friendly forces deaths, more enemy kills, more battles or wars won? Clearly, it's not quite so straightforward. The last thing we need to do is identify and publish the lessons drawn from the previous stage. This is produced in the form of PXRs, after-action reviews, surveys, which takes us back to stage 1, where the process might start again. As you can see, there's a lot to consider here if you're implementing a large-scale change, but each step is important as it ensures the next step's success. Whilst a huge change management project may initially seem daunting, once broken down into these small component parts, it should seem more achievable. The process described here is linear. Throughout, though, we need to have Noster's principles in the back of our mind. Noster stated that if we have all 5 components, vision, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan, then we'll get successful change. He then describes the consequences of removing one of these components. The vision comes from your leader, the person who is directing the change. That may be in the form of an end state. This is exactly the same as your one-up's intent in a set of orders. Whilst missions and tasks may change as no plan survives first contact, the intent stays the same, which means his or her end state will be achieved. If we remove this vision, then there's ambiguity and we get confusion. People will be possibly working towards different ends, which will cause friction. If you're asked to do something, given the resources and then a deadline, but you don't know how to do it, then you'll doubtless be filled with anxiety. If you ask someone to implement change in their unit, but you haven't trained them how to do it, then they'll worry. In our environment, there's often a hesitance to ask for help, as it's wrongly seen as weakness. Instead, the person tasked will just crack on and gradually get more and more stressed. Next, there's the need to be having an incentive for change. If change can't be seen to be a benefit, then people will want to stay as they are, and so this will lead to resistance. It's much easier to incentivize a workforce which is invested and motivated by the organisation doing well, rather than only caring about their own personal gain. If someone knows why they're doing something, knows how to do it, knows when to do it, and ultimately they want to do it, then they're going to feel frustrated if you don't give them the resources to actually do it, be it time, manpower, or money. And finally, if you don't have a plan, then your change will never get off the ground. Noster likens this to running on a treadmill. A motivated person who's working really hard and using lots of energy, but ultimately going nowhere. If more than one of these principles isn't present, then the problem will only be made worse. In summary, we've looked at the importance of thinking outside the box when identifying all the stakeholders. We've also looked at Lewin's simple 3 steps of change: unfreeze, change, refreeze. And then we looked at the activities that might take place during those stages. This is a chronological step-by-step process. Now, can you remember Noster's principles? Noster's principles of vision, skills, incentives, resources, action plan, these need to be considered at all stages of the change management process. You'll go into more detail in your change management lesson, where you'll also get the chance to discuss changes that you've experienced in the workplace, both positive and negative. If you're a soldier who has any questions about what you've seen on this podcast, then don't hesitate to get in touch with your local Army Education Centre. And thanks for watching.